I have been trying to tell this story for a long time, not because the words are hard to find exactly, but because every time I get close to the center of it, something in me pulls back. Some instinct that I used to trust completely, that used to feel like self-preservation, tells me to stop, to leave the middle of it alone, to describe only the edges and call that the whole thing. I'm done listening to that instinct, because I think that instinct is part of what's wrong with me. I think the pulling back, the careful editing, the way I have always preferred the perimeter of things to their center, is connected to what happened that February in South Dakota, connected in a way I am only now beginning to understand the shape of. So I'm going to tell you all of it, from the beginning. I moved to South Dakota because I wanted to disappear. Not in a dramatic sense, not in any way that requires a crisis or a breakdown, or a reason that other people would recognize as sufficient. I moved there because I had spent 31 years discovering, one failed interaction at a time, that I was not built for proximity to other people, that the version of me that existed when other people were present was a lesser version, thinner, more effortful, like a translation of myself into a language I'd never been fully fluent in. The house I found was in one of the snowier parts of the state, western South Dakota, on a flat stretch of land where the horizon goes all the way around you in every direction, and the sky is so large it stops feeling like sky and starts feeling like a condition. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile in either direction. The road in front of the house saw maybe 4 or 5 vehicles on a busy day. In winter, sometimes fewer than that. I hit my front door with my shoulder and got inside and locked it, and put my back against it and slid down to the floor. And I sat there on my floor in my coat and tried to breathe. And I looked at my hands, and they were cold. Not the cold of a person who has been outside in a blizzard. I know that cold. It bites and burns and aches in the joints. This was different. This was the cold of something that has been cold for a long time and has passed through the stage of noticing it into something quieter on the other side. A settled cold, a permanent cold. The cold of something that is no longer generating its own heat. I am going to tell you what I believe happened, not what I can prove, not what I can explain to someone standing in daylight in a warm room. What I believe, assembled from the pieces of that winter and everything before it, and the specific shape of the wrongness that has been present in my life for longer than I want to admit. I believe the cold is real. I believe Harlan was telling the truth, that there is something in that landscape that is old and patient and oriented toward warmth the way a plant is oriented toward light, that it doesn't move through the world the way living things move, with intention and effort and expenditure, but the way weather moves, the way temperature differentials move, by filling the space that has been prepared for it. And I believe it had been preparing me for a very long time. Because when I think about my life before South Dakota, before the house on the flatland, before the deliberate solitude, I find it harder and harder to locate the original impulse, the moment I decided that isolation was my preference and not something that had been cultivated in me, the moment the choice was mine and not a response to a pressure I couldn't see or name. I have always been alone. I have always preferred it. I have always arranged my life around it with a thoroughness and a consistency that I understood as personality, but that I now understand as something closer to preparation. Something was keeping me ready. Something was keeping me isolated and still and available. The photographs on Harlan's wall were my life, all of it, from the earliest years I can access, from before any choice I consciously made, which means the watching started before the choices, which means the choices were never only mine. And I think about the blizzards, the specific, relentless quality of those storms, the way they came back, the way the sky never fully cleared between them that February, the way the storms seemed to know where I was, which is an insane thing to say, and I am saying it anyway, because I have run out of sane things that account for all the evidence. The cold was lonely, and I had spent 31 years becoming the perfect shape of company for it. Here is what I know about where I am right now. I know the temperature is constant, not comfortable, constant, in the way that temperature is constant in a place where the ordinary fluctuations of heat and cold, of bodies moving through space, of meals being cooked and lights being turned on and off, are absent. A flat, unchanging, institutional constancy. I know the light above me doesn't change. No morning quality, no afternoon quality.
no angle. It simply exists, even and sourceless, the kind of light that is designed to illuminate without casting shadows. I know there is a smell I cannot quite identify, metallic and clean and faint, at the very edge of perception, the way the smell of a hospital is at the very edge of perception when you have not been in one long enough to stop noticing it.
I know that when I reach for the memory of breathing, the specific physical sensation of my lungs filling and releasing in the aftermath of running home from Harlan's house, of sitting on my floor, of existing in my body in the ordinary way bodies exist, I find something that might be a memory and might be a reconstruction, something my mind assembled from stored material to fill a space where experience should be and isn't. I know that the faces on Harlan's wall were getting younger as I looked at them, left to right, as though the collection was moving backward through me, as though whatever was using those images as a record was accessing them in reverse sequence, earliest to most recent, which is the direction memory degrades when the mechanism that holds it together begins to fail. From the outside in, from the edges toward the center, the way ice moves through tissue, the way cold moves through a body that is no longer warm enough to resist it. I am not in South Dakota.
I think I walked into that field, and I think the cold took me before I reached the house, and I think what came after, the photographs, Harlan's voice, the running, the floor, all of it, was not experience, but the echo of experience, the last processing of stored material by a brain trying to account for what was happening to the body it lives in, trying to build a story around the cold. Because that's what brains do. They don't go dark all at once. They go dim in sequence, and as they dim, they generate. They reach into the archive of what has been lived and experienced and felt, and they assemble it into something that feels like the present tense, something that feels like I am here, I am thinking, I am alive, I am in danger, but I am still moving, right up until the archive runs out. I am a body in a cold room. I have been here long enough that the people in the building have stopped checking as frequently as they checked at the beginning. Long enough that the routines around me have shifted from urgent to procedural. I moved to South Dakota to be alone. I was already alone before I got there. The cold had made sure of it. It was making sure of me for my entire life, keeping me isolated, keeping me still, keeping me available, the way you keep something in a particular condition so that when you need it, it is already prepared. Harlan's smile, that too wide, too much smile. I understand it now. He wasn't welcoming me. He was recognizing me. The way you recognize something you've been waiting a long time for. The way the cold recognizes warmth, right before it takes it. I am running out of corridors. The photographs on the wall keep getting younger, and the room is always the same temperature, and I can't remember the last time I was warm.
I signed the lease and moved in on a Thursday in October, and I remember standing in the empty living room with the moving boxes still stacked by the door, looking out the front window at the flat, brown land going to the horizon, and feeling something I had never felt before in my adult life. Complete. That's the word. Not happy exactly, not relieved, complete. Like a circuit that had been sitting open for 3 decades had finally closed. I should have known that feeling was too specific to be innocent. The first 2 years were exactly what I had designed them to be. I worked at a logistics company in town, 40 minutes each way. I drove in, did the job, drove home. I never lingered in the parking lot or accepted invitations to after-work drinks or learned the last names of the people I sat near every day. I came home to my house and my silence and the particular quality of the South Dakota dark, which is a darkness that has real depth to it, not the polluted orange-gray of city nights, but an actual dimensional absence of light that you can feel against your skin. I didn't know my neighbors. I had no reason to. The houses were too far apart for casual encounter, and I was not a person who manufactured occasions for connection that nature hadn't provided. If I saw a vehicle on the road, I didn't wave. If I noticed a light in a window down the way, I noted it and moved on. I was not cold about it.
I was simply arranged differently than people who find that kind of thing natural. I thought that was just who I was. I didn't understand yet that it might be who something had made me. The winter that matters started the way all South Dakota winters start, gradually, and then all at once. By January of my 4th year in the house, I had my seasonal rhythms so well established they barely required thought. I knew exactly when to switch the heating system to its winter setting.
I knew which windows drafted and which didn't, which pipes needed to be left dripping on the coldest nights, which stretch of road would drift over first and require the longest detour. I knew the specific quality of the sky in the 48 hours before a serious storm, the way the clouds flatten and lower and the light goes a particular shade of gray that isn't quite the gray of an ordinary overcast day. It's colder looking, more deliberate. I saw that sky in the first week of February. The storm came the following Tuesday. I was at work when it started, watching through the window as the first bands of snow moved across the parking lot. Within an hour, visibility was down to maybe 100 yards. My boss let everyone go early, and I drove home on roads that were already starting to drift, the wind pushing at the side of my truck hard enough that I had to compensate with the steering wheel. I pulled into my driveway at 3:45 in the afternoon. I climbed out, pulled my coat tight, walked to the front door, put my key in the lock, and the lock didn't move. I stood there for a moment, not quite accepting what was happening. I tried again. The mechanism was completely seized. Moisture had gotten into the housing during the day and frozen solid, turning the whole assembly into a single rigid block. I didn't have anything on me that could generate enough heat to matter. I tried breathing on it, cupping my hands around it, pressing my palm flat against the metal. The cold took everything I offered and gave nothing back. I walked back to the truck and sat inside with the heater running. I told myself I would wait, maybe an hour. Maybe the temperature would shift slightly and the mechanism would loosen and I could get inside and make dinner. And tomorrow this would be a minor story about a bad afternoon. I watched the snow through the windshield. The snow fell harder. 10 minutes later, I tried to back the truck out of the driveway.
The wheels spun and found nothing. The drift behind me had built up past the running boards while I sat there. I was stuck. I sat with the engine running and thought about my options with the careful, unemotional efficiency I'd always applied to practical problems. The gas would run out eventually. When it did, the heat would stop, and then I would be sitting in an uninsulated metal box in the middle of a blizzard, with the temperature outside dropping toward zero. I did not have anyone to call. My parents were hours away, and the roads were already impassable. I didn't know my neighbors. Not their names, not their faces, not their numbers. The closest house was a quarter-mile down the road. I turned off the engine, tightened my coat, and started walking. I want to describe that walk accurately because the physical experience of it matters to what comes after. A blizzard-force wind in open South Dakota terrain is not like wind in a city, where buildings interrupt it and redirect it and break it into something manageable. Out there, it comes straight and unimpeded across a flat surface for as far as it wants to come, and by the time it reaches you, it has been building for miles. It hits with a sustained, pressurized force that feels personal, like something that has decided you specifically are an obstacle it wants to remove. The snow doesn't fall. It moves, horizontal in the gusts, and it finds every gap in your clothing with a patience that feels almost methodical. Within 2 minutes, my ears were past pain and into the dull, worrying numbness that comes after. Within 4, my fingers had gone the same way inside my gloves. I kept my head down and walked toward where I knew the road bent slightly and the neighboring property began. The house came out of the white like a shape being remembered rather than seen. One story. Small.
Old construction, the kind that settles into its foundation over decades until it looks less like something built and more like something that grew. A single window was lit on the ground floor. The yellow light of it in all that white was the most welcome thing I had ever seen. I knocked. I waited. The wind pushed against my back. I knocked again, louder. The door opened. Not cautiously, the way you'd expect from someone encountering a stranger on their porch during a blizzard. It opened fast, the way a door opens when the person behind it has been standing very close to it, waiting, for longer than they should have been. The man looking at me was tall, taller than the door frame should comfortably allow for, though I couldn't have told you exactly why I felt that. He had a lean, long-proportioned face and eyes that were a color I registered as unusual without being able to name it. Not gray, not quite blue, something between those things that doesn't have a common word.
He looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he said his name was Harlan. I told him what had happened, the lock, the truck, the storm. He listened with his head very slightly tilted, the way you listen when you're processing something on a level beneath the literal content of the words. When I finished, he nodded once and stepped back from the door. I walked inside. The house was warm. That was the first thing, and for about 30 seconds, it was the only thing. The heat came off the walls and the floor and the air itself and washed over me in a wave that my fingers ached as the blood came rushing back into them. I stood in the entryway and just breathed it in, and for those 30 seconds, I didn't think about anything else. He offered me a seat on the couch. He settled into an armchair across from me, his long legs folded at an angle that seemed like it should have been uncomfortable, but apparently wasn't. His hands rested flat on the armrests. We talked.
I can tell you that we talked for a while, but I find when I try to reconstruct the specifics of that conversation that most of it has the quality of a dream recalled hours later. The general shape is there, but the details are soft. I remember asking him how long he'd lived on the road, and his answer containing no actual number. I remember asking him what he did, and him saying something about the land keeping him occupied, the kind of answer that sounds like an answer until you examine it. What I remember with precision is when the conversation changed. It changed without transition. One moment we were talking about ordinary things, or the outlines of ordinary things, and the next he was talking about the cold. Not the weather, not the storm outside, the cold as a concept, as a thing. He spoke about it the way you speak about someone you know very well, with the specific, detailed familiarity of long acquaintance. He said the cold was older than anything on that land, older than the settlements, older than the roads, older than the names people had given to the places and the distances between them. He said the cold had a memory that worked differently than human memory, not linear, not organized around events, but spatial and total, the way the land itself remembers the shape of water that hasn't been there for 10,000 years. He said the cold got lonely. He said it with the same tone and weight he'd used for everything else, completely level, completely without affect. And yet those 3 words arrived in the room differently than the words before them. They arrived in my chest, somewhere below conscious thought, at the level where the body registers threat before the mind has finished processing the input. I asked him what he meant by lonely. He looked at me then with a focus he hadn't given anything else in the conversation, complete, unbroken, and absolutely still.
He said the cold had developed, over a very long time, an appetite for a particular kind of warmth. Not the physical warmth of a body, the warmth of a mind under pressure, the specific thermal signature of a nervous system trying to process something it wasn't designed to understand. He said blizzards happened where people were not, by coincidence, but by orientation, that the cold moved toward concentration, toward isolation, toward the places where the minds were warm and frightened and most alone. He said that was why I had come to South Dakota. He said it the way you state a fact that both parties already know. I stood up. I said I thought the storm had probably let up enough for me to try walking home. I said it in the controlled, neutral voice I use when I have decided something is over and I am now managing the exit. He stood up too, immediately and easily, unfolding from the chair to his full height in a single fluid movement. His head was too close to the ceiling. He said that was fine. He said I should come visit him again when the next one came. He walked me to the door and opened it himself, and I stepped out into the blizzard, and he stood in the doorway behind me as I walked away, and I did not look back because something in me was absolutely certain that looking back was the wrong thing to do. I walked home. The lock had thawed slightly, and I got inside on the 3rd try. I sat on my couch with all the lights on, and I did not sleep. 3 days later, the storm came back. Or a new one came. By that point, the distinction had stopped feeling real. The sky had been the color of cold iron for 4 days, and the wind had not fully stopped between events. It felt less like consecutive weather systems and more like a single thing that had paused to gather itself. I was in bed when the thought arrived. I want to be precise about this. It arrived the way external things arrive, with a completeness and a certainty that my own thoughts don't have. My own thoughts have edges, places where they blur into qualification and doubt. This one was seamless. It said simply that I should go to Harlan's house. And I got up. I put on my coat and my boots, and I went outside into the dark and the snow, and I walked in the direction he had gestured 3 nights before. I don't know how I knew which way to go. There were no landmarks visible. The road was a white ribbon, disappearing into white dark in both directions. I just walked, and the direction felt external, like a pressure applied from outside. The house was bigger than I remembered. 2 stories now, or perhaps I had simply not registered the 2nd floor before. Old construction, large windows, lit from inside with a light that was amber and deep, and not quite the color of any artificial light I could identify. I knocked. Harlan opened the door immediately, as though he'd been standing just behind it. He looked exactly the same. Coat on, pale face, those no-color eyes. He stepped aside, and I walked in. The room was warmer than before, significantly warmer, in a way that didn't feel proportional to any heat source I could identify. No fireplace burning, no visible radiators running hot. The warmth seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the air, from something ambient and sourceless. He offered me a seat. He sat across from me. He talked. His voice had the same quality it had had 3 nights before, level and precise and slightly too careful, the way someone speaks when they have been thinking about what they're going to say for much longer than the conversation would seem to warrant. I sat across from him and I listened, and I looked around the room the way I do when I am listening to someone and letting my eyes move so it doesn't look like I'm staring. And that's when I saw the photographs. They were arranged on the wall beside the window.
A dozen frames, different sizes, the kind of arrangement that accumulates over years rather than being designed all at once. The domestic grammar of a family wall, pictures at different stages, different ages, the visual record of a life. I looked at them. I looked at the largest one first, a child of maybe 6 or 7, standing in a yard in winter clothes, squinting against bright snow. The child's face was turned slightly toward the camera, one hand raised against the glare. Something moved in my chest. I looked at the next one, a boy of maybe 12, sitting at a kitchen table with a book open in front of him. The window behind him had a particular quality of winter afternoon light, the specific gold of late-day sun through frost-edged glass. My mouth went dry. I looked at the next one, a teenager, maybe 16, standing in front of a car I recognized, a dark blue sedan with a dent in the rear quarter panel on the driver's side. My father's car, the car he drove when I was in high school. I stood up. My chair went backward and hit the wall, and Harlan did not react to the sound at all. I was in every photograph on that wall, every single one. My face, my specific particular face, at every age from early childhood to what appeared to be my late 20s, in places I had been, in clothes I had owned, in moments I had lived, or moments that were adjacent to moments I had lived, close enough that I could feel the original moment behind them like a shape behind frosted glass. Someone had been watching me my entire life. Someone had been collecting me. Harlan was watching me from the armchair with that level, patient focus. He said, "You're remembering." I ran, out the door, into the snow, back down the road toward my house. I ran until my legs stopped working properly, and I ran further, my arms pumping, my breath coming in ragged pulls that burned all the way down.